Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. Today, Luis Carrones, Technical Director of PandaLabs, will be discussing some of the standout attacks of 2017, WannaCry, not Petya, Equifax, among others, and will share some predictions for what's to come in 2018. At the end of the discussion, he will offer some recommendations and take your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Panda's own cybersecurity guru, Luis Carrones.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Hello, everyone. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar. As Kevin was saying, in this presentation, I'm going to quickly walk you through some of the most relevant attacks that happened in 2017. Then we will take a look at some of the malware and tech figures for this year, and afterwards, I will show you the security predictions for 2018. I have handpicked just a few examples of the most relevant security incidents that have taken place during 2017. And of course, I had to start with WannaCry. As you know, it was a network worm with ransomware capabilities that used a recently patched vulnerability that managed to infect thousands of businesses around the world in just a matter of hours. I do not want to enter into details. There is a webinar I made in May that is available online if you want, and in case you want to go deep into the details of the attack, how it worked, its consequences, etc., you have it all there. However, there are a few things about this attack that I like to point out, as it somehow reflects what is happening nowadays. We're talking about one of the most serious malware attacks ever. We have seen malware attacks in the past that spread much faster and infected way more computers, like, I don't know, I'm thinking, for example, in Blaster or SQL Slammer, and there are many more examples. But the fact that every computer that was infected got their data encrypted by the ransomware component of the worm, that was devastating by itself. I mean, even if a business, as a business, you had backups of the information, the amount of time and money needed to clean the network and restore the files was huge. And on top of that, there were companies paying the ransom. So some estimations talk about thousands of millions of dollars. I don't know. I mean, it sounds like too much money, but it's really hard to measure. Anyway, I'm pretty certain that this has been the attack that has caused more losses in the history so far. As we've mentioned, it was using ransomware to make money. Money is the reason why almost all cyber attacks are carried out today. Yes, we also talk about, and I will talk here about the state-sponsored attacks, etc. But that is just a tiny drop in a huge ocean of attacks. And I'm talking about the state-sponsored attacks. One of the theories behind this attack is that it could have been perpetrated by the Lazarus Group, which is linked to North Korea and has perpetrated a number of attacks in the past. It is that North Korea could have used this to make money, as they need cash, in the same way they perpetrated some of the bank heist against the SWIFT network that took place last year. Finally, NSA. What we know for sure about this attack is that it could not have happened without the involuntary help of the NSA. They found out the vulnerability in Windows. They developed the exploit Eternal Blue to attack their targets, and later they lost it. Well, it was stolen from them and became what I like to call a weapon of mass infection that was used by the WannaCry attackers. The next attack I would like to talk about is the non-Petya or Petya Goldeneye that took place in Ukraine. I did also another webinar about this in July, so if you want more details, you can go and check it out. I just want to highlight a few things that are the perfect example of some of the trends we are seeing in many attacks that are happening right now. First, the delivery. I mean, it was a backdoor application, MEDOC, that was compromised, and through this application is how the attackers infected their victims. This is an application that was really popular in Ukraine and just in Ukraine, so it was perfect because they were just targeting Ukraine companies. The use of exploits, they were using both Eternal Blue and Eternal Romance, courtesy of the NSA, part of the weapons they were stolen, the NSA. They used also credentials extraction for lateral movement in the bridge networks. So if they had compromised a computer inside the network, then they were extracting credentials from that computer to move laterally inside the network. Also, the abuse of non-malicious tools such as PSXAC or WMIC. Months later, another attack used the same approach as the backdoor application to infect user. Probably you have heard about that. It was the application CCleaner, which is actually used by millions of people, and it was compromised. The attackers hacked the company, modified certain files of the application so they could install malware in any computer that had the compromised versions installed. Now I want to talk about the Sabre Corporation. This is a huge American corporation. It manages reservations for more than 100,000 hotels and 70 airlines, which is not bad at all. And they got one system, yes, one of their systems. They have many systems, and one of them was compromised. It was only affecting 35,000 hotels, and it took 7 months until they realized they had been breached. And this is a perfect example of how attackers are becoming more and more ambitious. When all these cybercrime things started, the target was always the final user, and most attacks via phishing and backing Trojans were directed to the weakest link in the chain, which was the end user. However, in the last years, that has changed. For example, we saw in 2016 that a huge number of hotel chains were compromised. We had a white paper published that describes the kind of attacks that this particular sector is suffering. And most of these attacks are always after the same thing, about the point of sale. They are after the point of sales terminals of these hotels, just to steal credit card information from their customers. This incident in the Sabre Corporation shows how going after the hotels is not enough, and they are looking for the target that can give a better return of investment, no matter how big that target can be. And Equifax, that's the next case I want to talk about quickly. Well, probably you already know about this case, but still, there was a vulnerability that was disclosed back in March in a certain piece of software that Equifax was using. They didn't patch it in time, and in fact, the attackers, it only took a few days since the vulnerability was disclosed until the attackers breached into Equifax. It took a few months until they realized and noticed the breach, and the attackers could compromise basically information about hundreds of millions of people, most of them in the United States, but also in Canada and the UK and some other countries. As a consequence, the CISO was fired right away, and the CEO stepped down a few weeks later, after having been in the company for many years. Deep Analytics. This is another company. It's an American company. It's a marketing company that was hired by the Republican Party in the United States. So probably you're not familiar with this company. The thing is that they had a database of 25 terabytes with all kind of sensitive information belonging to 198 million of US voters. And I want to talk about this case not just because of the huge amount of information involved, but the main reason to mention it is how it happened, because it was not a hack, it was not a state-sponsored attack or anything like that. They uploaded information to the Amazon cloud, and let's say they made a configuration error. So you only need two things to access the information: an internet connection and visit the URL where the database was located, just like that. And in many cases, it's not just this is just one example, but there are many cases like this, where people is not configuring properly or setting the security checks they need to set when they put the information in the cloud, and then this happens, that all the information can be compromised. And now let's take a look at the figures. I don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of data. I will just highlight some of the most relevant information, and if you're interested, you can find all the details in the annual report we published last week. In fact, for this section, I just want you to remember one number, and that's it, I promise. I will show you a few more numbers, but I only want you to remember one number. So, let's talk about malware prevalence, a topic worth discussing. This is the typical thing you see in each and every report from any security vendor. In fact, we have also included a top 10 of the malware that has been queried the most to our cloud. But the question is, how relevant is this information? Do we really have to care about it? To answer these questions, let's make a time travel, not a long one, just back to 2002, where here you can see that year the 10 most prevalent malware samples caused the 40% of all the infections worldwide. Just the top 10 malware samples. 4 years later, that's 2006, the top 10 caused just 10% of all infections. It's still a huge amount of infections, so we're talking about millions of computers. But from 40%, it went down to 10%. So it's much lower, still relevant. Let me show you the top for, this is in 2017, the top 10, 0.00%. And you can say like, no, how is this even possible? We have had like huge cases. You have just talked about some of them. Yeah, let me show you the top 10. You see the CCC cleaner, the server, which is a famous ransomware family, WannaCry, some downloader, bots. So we're talking, WannaCry was, we were talking about hundreds of thousands of computers affected. And still, with this top 10, we only recorded like 0.00%. To make a 0.01, I would need to take the top 1,000. So you can imagine how the things are. And now I'm going to show you the most relevant number of all. Do you know, out of all the new malware we have seen from the cloud, how many has been seen in only one computer during 2017? 99.10%. And this is the figure we have to care about. Most of the malware only lives for a few seconds and won't be seen again, ever. I could show you more figures like infection rates per country, etc. If you're interested in the report, we have all the details you want. But what I want is that you remember this particular number and what it means. If you don't have defenses that allow you to recognize, let's call it zero-day malware that has never been seen before, you're going to have a huge problem where you already have it. And now is the time to take a look at the main security predictions for the next year. I will go over all of them, but I'm going to focus in the ones I consider more relevant for all of us. And at the end of this section, I will show you an example of a recent attack we uncovered that matches with these predictions. So let's start with Cyberwarfare and its consequences. This is a term that is used more and more, and it is for a reason. It is real. If you ask me, the Petya Goldeneye is clearly a state-sponsored attack. It is true that the cyberwarfare we're looking at nowadays is more like a guerrilla kind of war. It's not an open war. But in any case, what are the implications that it has for the rest of the world? Well, as a starter, a consequence of this cyber arms race is that most countries have their own legions of cyber warriors, from US, China, Russia, Germany, you name it. We're talking about tens, probably hundreds of thousands of people with access to advanced cyber weapons and specific training. With time, some of these people will go to the private industry as freelancers at the service of the highest bidder, and bands of professional cyber criminals will be able to find a pool of well-prepared professionals with access to cyber weapons and valuable knowledge for launching attacks. And as a consequence, we will see how the number of advanced attacks and complex attacks grows. Now let's talk about the false flag operations. One of the things that nations love about cyber attacks is the anonymity provided by the internet, and there's no doubt that this is something they are already using, not just to avoid being identified as the perpetrator of a particular attack, but also to leave breadcrumbs to make the world think the attacker is a different one. So when you hear about yet another cyber attack and people start pointing fingers, this came from China, from the US, etc., well, don't really trust it. I mean, proving the real perpetrator is really, really, really difficult. And many times it's just not possible to find out with absolute certainty who it is. So that's it. And another important consequence of the cyber attacks are the collateral victims. And if we go back to the Petya Goldeneye attack, that was a sabotage against Ukraine, targeting both public and private companies that were working there. However, the attack affected computers in more than 60 countries. So there will always be collateral victims. We saw it in Stuxnet. We have seen it here, and the number will increase. I mean, we are all using the same internet, and even if the attacker doesn't intend to, it will always, in one way or the other, affect the rest of the internet and the rest of the users. The number of this is going to increase, with a special mention to ransomware, of course. At the end of the day, everything is about the money, which also means the attacks will be more complex and advanced, and ransomware is an easy way to make a lot of money very quickly and in a safe way for cyber criminals. The landscape has changed a lot. I mean, the 99.10% I have shown you when we were taking a look at the figures makes it clear. But the problem is not, yes, that almost each malware is different. It is much worse. I mean, there are more and more cases where we see that there is no actual malware in the attack. They just use non-malicious tools to perform these attacks. Some other use fileless techniques where there is actually no file safe in the computer's attack, and everything takes place in memory. And the number of cases of compromised applications, such as the one we have already seen this year, will increase a lot. Specifically in the advanced attack area, because it is one of them. Can be one of the most successful ways to compromise a specific target. One of the affirmations we make in this prediction is that 2018 is going to be the year of attacks on companies. Why is that? Well, I have told you that we expect more attacks and more advanced, but that's not the reason behind this. The main reason is the GDPR legislation that will start next year in Europe, but it will affect everyone in the world, or at least anyone that is making business with European citizens or European countries. Nowadays, a huge amount of security breaches happen, and we do not know anything about them. They are not reported. We are not aware of those security breaches. Thanks to the GDPR, this will change. Otherwise, companies risk to get huge fines. So even if the number of attacks stay the same, the number of reported attacks will skyrocket. And our prediction is that the number of attacks is going to skyrocket too. So if you add that to the fact that now the attacks have to be reported, and will be more reported than nowadays in any case, we will see a huge amount of cases of companies attacking compromised. Malware for mobile devices and the Internet of Things will continue to rise, but well, still nowhere close to attacks that happen in endpoints of servers. I mean, in general, IoT devices are not targeted by cyber criminals as their ultimate goal. In some cases, it could be like when they compromise them to make them like bots to launch DDoS attacks, for example. But in general, when compromised, these devices, what they do is increase the attack surface, and they are just used as a gateway to the company's network. I mean, they want to get to their real computers at the end of the day, and being it servers or endpoints. That's the target the attackers are looking for. So they could use IoT hardware to attack it to get to those real computers, let's say. About social media and propaganda, this has been a hot topic this year too. there will be an increase in fake news due to the ability of these platforms, of the social networks, to influence public opinion, and there's people always ready to abuse any system. In fact, Facebook, which is the largest social network in the world, is already taking action on this matter. Cryptocurrencies. The use of cryptocurrencies will continue to grow, and all the cybercrime that surrounds it, also such as infecting computers with cryptocurrency mining software, compromising websites to make their visitors mine without their knowledge, theft of user wallets, etc. All these kind of cybercrime will increase. So these are the main predictions. So when are they going to happen? When is this going to be like the 1st of January or when? When these catastrophic predictions are going to take place? Well, they are already happening. Bad news. And to illustrate this, I want to show you an example of an attack that we discovered after the annual report was written. So all the prediction, everything was already written, and then we discovered this attack. I call this attack Fileless Monero WannaMine. I wrote an article in our media center if you want to see the detail. But some of the characteristics of this attack include using a script to load a custom version of Mimikatz, a known hacking tool. We're using this Mimikatz in memory to steal credentials. So these credentials were being harvested to move laterally in the internal network of the victim. Then it was using also a PowerShell to use the NSA's Eternal Blue exploit against those computers that were not patched, and also WMI to remotely execute commands taking advantage of the previously stolen credentials. So there are, here you can see there are a number of different techniques like fileless, malwareless, weapons created by nation states. And do you know what was this for? I mean, this was kind of a pretty advanced attack. It was really automated. And so what were they after? Well, just to install Monero miners. Monero is a cryptocurrency similar to Bitcoin, and the goal of these attackers was to install miners in as many computers as possible in the network they were attacking. And that was it. So they were not after stealing information, confidential information or anything, just installing mining software. So that's why I think this is a great example of things that we're going to see next year, and we have to be prepared for. And well, with this I have covered the main things. Now it is time for some recommendations and conclusions after all the things we have learned here today. But don't worry that I won't make it long. In fact, I'm going to skip the recommendations at all. I mean, you have them in the report if you want. And I prefer to focus on what it really matters. Most security companies, including Panda, are growing, are doing great. There is a lot of risk there, and people need protection, so they buy our software and our services, and that's fantastic. But at the same time, the number and gravity of security incidents keeps growing exponentially. This is a complex problem, and there are no easy solutions or silver bullets, but there are certain things that have to be said and made. Do you remember the magic number, the 99.10%? Well, I'm afraid that tonight you're all going to have nightmares with this number. One thing we can learn, thanks to it, is that signatures are almost useless. You may wonder why, if I'm saying they are almost useless, Panda is still using them. Well, we add them just in case a testing laboratory later decides to carry out a malware detection test using signatures, something which is becoming less and less common, thanks God. Or for those who believe that such results translate into the capability of a product to detect a threat or not, which is not true, but still there are a lot of people that still believe that. One of the most prestigious tests nowadays is the real-world protection test performed by AV Comparatives. This independent AV comparative test lab every month try like hundreds of different threats in the same way users have to face them, like coming from the internet, email, etc. So they are doing the same things that people do in the real world, and then test the most important security solutions against them to see if they really can protect against the attacks or not. Well, let me show you the results of the latest test. This is the one from October 2017, the last one that has been published. You can see Panda there, 100% detection rate with 0 false positives. This is just the latest one. Almost every month they perform this test, and you will see how Panda is always in the top positions, month after month. In July, we were given the highest award after the results we obtained from January to May, and we expect to get the same reward in December. One of the duties as PandaLabs technical director is to represent Panda Security in security industry events, and where I meet many competitors. Some of them are even friends of mine. And I'm often asked here how we do it. They know how hard it is to get the best scores once, let alone each and every single test. So they're really puzzled. They can't figure out how are we doing it. And let me reveal a secret about this. I mean, we do not get a great result because we are detecting the malware by signatures. I mean, oh yeah, it's a malware, we know it, we are already detecting it, and that's how we protect the user. No, we are not doing that. In fact, I mean, in most cases, we won't detect the malware samples at all. If you run a scan against the malware files, I mean, you take the file, like right-click, scan with the antivirus, and we won't detect anything. In most cases, or at least in a good number of them. But still, you see here the 100%. So how is that possible? Well, that's possible because of the approach we have. If you try to infect the computer, like in the real world, then you will find that Panda is blocking the attack. We know how the bad guys behave. We know how they do things, and we are able to block them to protect the computers of the users. Last summer, I was talking to a tester that he had been testing like different solutions, including Panda, and we didn't get a great result there. So he was telling me how he made the test, and I saw there were a number of flaws in his methodology. So I pointed them out, like, look, you should do this, like if you were a real user, and then or at least a real attacker, and you send the attack, and then you fool the user into click it, or use an exploit to automatically execute the malware in the computer you're attacking, etc. So he said, okay, what you say makes sense. So I'm going to run the same test with different malware samples, and I will check against all the security solutions and see what happens. And okay, the result was completely different, and that time Panda was on top. So this is a bit of the secret. One thing I would like to point out in this graphic before I move from this slide is the result of a couple of companies, those that usually call themselves like next-gen antivirus. You can find them easily if you look at the bottom of the graph, the last two ones. You might wonder, okay, where are some of the other next-gen companies, such as Silence, Palo Alto, Carbon Black, FireEye? Where are they? I mean, why are they not here? I mean, there are a number of important companies here. You see Microsoft, Symantec, Panda, of course, Trend Micro. So where are these other companies? Well, I can tell you one thing, they are not here. And probably the reason is that if they were, we should also take a look at the bottom of the graph to find them, so they rather not participate. So, do you want to know what the main problem is of protection when we are talking about protecting users, protecting computers, networks, companies? The main problem is a strategy problem, the problem that security companies have nowadays. Most security solutions remain focused on fighting against malware. I mean, it makes sense, of course. What are you going to fight against, right? Yeah, well, let me tell you, this is the wrong approach. and they will disappear if they follow with this strategy, because they are not going to be able to cope with the kind of attacks we are seeing nowadays. If you focus on fighting malware, that's a war you have lost beforehand. Remember just the number of cases of malware-less attacks that keeps growing, and all those kind of things that if you're just looking for malware and there is no malware in the attacks, how are you going to stop that? Yeah, exactly. So we thought we needed what was the right strategy, so we applied it, and it works. And the number of incidents escalated to our lab in 2017 tends to zero incidents escalated to the lab. So we are really proud of that. And this has had a wonderful secondary effect, which is that PandaLabs engineers, some of the most talented minds in the world, it turns out that now they have spare time. And that's really bad news for the attackers. I mean, we have formed a threat hunting team that goes after any anomalous behavior that can happen. And they have uncovered a number of advanced attacks. Some of them are described in the annual report and with detail of what kind of attacks we were able to find out. I've been in this industry for almost 19 years now. I don't know where I will be in another 19, but I know where I would like to be. I would like to be in a trend, so leading the fight against all forms of cybercrime to make the world a safer place. Yeah, I know how this sounds, but I really feel it. I'm not bored. I love what I do. I love my job. I love fighting against cyber criminals, and I will keep doing that as long as I can. Thank you very much for attending this webinar, and if you have questions, I am available to answer them.